Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Damian's final moments were nothing like anyone could have expected, because as the monitors beeped faintly in the dimly lit hospital room and Lily clutched his hand, desperately whispering for him not to leave her, Damian stirred against all odds, his eyes fluttering open just enough for her to see the haunted desperation that had been buried behind years of half-truths and broken promises. And as Lily's tears fell freely onto his pale skin, she begged him to save his strength, but Damian tightened his grip weakly, forcing her attention as he rasped in a voice torn between agony and urgency that there was something she had to know, something he had hidden because the truth had always been too dangerous to say aloud. And at first Lily thought his words were just the confused ramblings of a dying man clinging to fragments of memory. But then his gaze sharpened with startling clarity as he said her name in a way that froze her blood and whispered, "You were never supposed to be with Kane, because Kane isn't who you think he is." And Lily pulled back slightly, stunned, her mind racing as Damian coughed violently, his body trembling from the effort of keeping himself conscious. But he pressed forward, insisting that he couldn't leave this world without unburdening the secret he had carried for years, a secret so explosive it would shake the very foundation of everything Lily believed about her family, her marriage, and her own identity. And though she begged him to stop, terrified of what might come out, Damian refused to be silenced, declaring that Kane's entire life had been built on a lie, that he had known from the very beginning that Kane wasn't who he claimed to be, and worse, that someone in Lily's family had orchestrated it, that her own blood had conspired to bring Kane into her life under false pretenses. And as Damian's words poured out in ragged fragments, Lily felt the room spin around her, because every syllable carried a weight of betrayal she wasn't prepared to face. And when Damian whispered the name of the family member involved, Lily gasped so violently she thought her lungs might collapse, for the name he spoke was not the one she had ever suspected, not someone she could have imagined being tied to such a scheme. And yet Damian's insistence made it impossible to dismiss as delirium, because the conviction in his fading eyes told her he was speaking the raw, unvarnished truth. And as the machines around him began to blare warning alarms, she screamed for the doctors, but Damian held her hand tighter, refusing to let her go, demanding that she listen to every word because this was his final confession, his last chance to give her the knowledge he had once vowed never to reveal. And Lily, shaking uncontrollably, leaned closer as he whispered a detail so specific, so horrifying, that it confirmed beyond a doubt that he wasn't imagining things. He told her about a night years ago, a clandestine meeting, and a forged document that had sealed her fate. And Lily could suddenly see in her mind's eye the puzzle pieces clicking together, the strange inconsistencies in Kane's past, the half-answers that never made sense, the secrets that always lurked just out of reach. And she realized with gut-wrenching horror that Damian was right, that her entire love story had been manipulated from the shadows. And when she asked him why her own family would do such a thing, Damian's lips trembled with the final ounce of strength he had left, and he told her it was because of her, because Lily had something inside her that others feared, something that made her a target, a legacy connected to a truth she was never supposed to uncover. And before she could demand what that meant, Damian's body convulsed, the monitor screamed, and his hand went limp in hers, leaving Lily gasping, trembling, trapped between grief and paralyzing terror, knowing that her life had just been split in two by the shocking secret Damian carried to his grave. And as the doctors rushed in and tried to revive him, Lily stumbled back, hearing his final words echo over and over in her mind like a curse she could never escape. Realizing that Damian's death had not only left her heartbroken but had also handed her a terrifying burden, a secret that scared her so deeply because it didn't just shatter her present, it threatened to destroy her entire future. The silence that followed Damian's last breath was louder than any noise Lily had ever heard, because it wasn't just the end of his life, it was the beginning of a truth that terrified her. And as the doctors worked frantically to resuscitate him, she stumbled backwards, clutching her chest as though her heart itself might give out under the weight of what she had just heard, her mind replaying the sound of his broken voice whispering the name of someone she trusted, someone she loved, someone who should never have been capable of orchestrating such a cruel deception. And yet Damian's words had been too precise, too deliberate, to dismiss as the ramblings of a dying man. So Lily stood there, frozen, watching as the doctors declared time of death, her whole body trembling with grief and fear, knowing she could never unhear what had been spoken, knowing that Damian had left her with a burden that would not let her sleep or breathe until she unraveled the truth, because if Cain's life had been built on lies, if her family had knowingly pulled her into a false love, then everything she had sacrificed, everything she had endured for the sake of her marriage, was nothing but a manipulated story written by someone else's hand. When the nurses finally pulled the sheet over Damian's body, Lily collapsed into the chair beside his bed, her sobs ripping through the sterile air, but beneath the grief there was something else simmering, a mixture of dread and fury, because Damian hadn't just confessed to a mistake, he had pointed her toward a conspiracy, one that had been carefully concealed for years, one that could explain all the strange gaps, the unspoken hesitations, the uneasy looks that had haunted her whenever Cain's past came up in conversation, and as her tears soaked her hands she whispered to herself, "Why didn't I see it sooner?" Her heart broke for Damian, for the torment he must have carried all these years, but it broke even more for herself, for the realization that the man she thought she knew, the man she had loved, forgiven, and built a family with, might not have been who he said he was at all, and as that thought burned its way into her soul, Lily felt a shiver of fear so deep it made her sick to her stomach, because if Cain wasn't who she thought, then who was he? The hallway outside Damian's room seemed endless as she staggered out, her eyes swollen, her body weak, but her mind already consumed with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered, and when she saw Cain waiting down the hall, concern etched across his face, her breath caught in her throat, because suddenly she couldn't look at him the same way, suddenly she saw not her husband but a stranger cloaked in secrets, and though he rushed to her, gathering her trembling body into his arms, whispering apologies for Damian's death, all Lily could feel was the chill of Damian's words pressing into her like a knife, and when Cain pulled back to look at her, asking gently what Damian had said before he passed, Lily forced a smile through her tears and shook her head, whispering, "Nothing that matters," because she couldn't bring herself to tell him, not yet, not until she knew what to believe, not until she had proof that her world had truly collapsed, but even as she lied, Cain's eyes narrowed just slightly, a flicker of unease crossing his face as though he knew she was hiding something, and Lily's stomach twisted tighter, because if Damian had been right, then Cain wasn't just her husband, he was the very reason she had been manipulated into this nightmare. That night, long after the funeral home had collected Damian's body and Cain had fallen asleep, Lily lay awake staring at the ceiling, Damian's final words pounding in her skull, and she replayed every strange moment in her marriage, every instance where Cain avoided a direct answer, every inconsistency in the stories he told about his childhood, his family, his arrival in town. And suddenly it all seemed to unravel like a carefully woven thread finally snapping, and though she wanted to shut her eyes, to drown herself in denial, she couldn't, because Damian's warning wasn't vague, it was pointed, deliberate, and filled with a conviction that demanded action, and Lily realized with dawning horror that she couldn't ignore it, because ignoring it meant living a life built on lies, and she had already lost too much to deception. So she rose quietly from the bed, slipping into her robe, her heart racing as she tiptoed into Cain's study, a room he always kept locked but where she had once noticed a folder he never let anyone touch, a folder she had assumed contained mundane business documents but which now called to her like a forbidden door, and after fumbling through his drawers she found the spare key, her hands shaking as she unlocked the cabinet and pulled the folder free, her breath catching as she opened it to reveal papers that didn't make sense. Birth certificates, passports, financial statements and names she didn't recognize, and a photograph of Cain with a man she had never seen before, a man who looked strikingly similar to him, and Lily's knees buckled beneath her because Damian's confession wasn't just possible, it was practically staring her in the face. But what broke her completely wasn't the papers themselves, it was the letter tucked at the very bottom of the folder, its edges worn as though it had been read countless times, addressed not to Cain, but to her. In handwriting she recognized instantly as belonging to the very family member Damian had accused, and as she unfolded it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanned the first line and her breath left her body, because the letter wasn't just a note, it was a confession, written years ago, explaining that Cain's arrival in her life had been orchestrated for reasons of protection, that she had been targeted by forces she couldn't understand, that the only way to keep her safe was to ensure she loved and trusted someone who could shield her. Someone who had been chosen for her long before she realized it, and though the letter never outright admitted to deceit, the implication was devastating, And Lily felt her chest cave in as she whispered Damian's words again, "You were never supposed to be with Kane," because now she understood, her entire marriage had been engineered, her entire life rewritten for someone else's agenda. The next morning, when Kane smiled at her over coffee as though nothing had changed, Lily could barely force herself to meet his eyes, the weight of Damian's secret crushing her into silence, and though part of her wanted to confront him right then, to throw the documents in his face and demand answers, another part of her, shaken, terrified, knew that if Damian had been right, then confronting Kane without proof or a plan might put her in danger, because if he had been living a lie all this time, if he had been complicit in a scheme tied to her family's betrayal, then what else was he capable of hiding, and more importantly, how far would he go to keep her from finding out? So Lily swallowed her rage, forced herself to play the role of the grieving wife, and vowed in the depths of her soul that she would uncover the entire truth piece by piece, no matter how painful, no matter how terrifying, because Damian's final gift wasn't just a confession, it was a warning, and she would not let his death be in vain. Lily moved through the next few days as if she were sleepwalking, her body going through the motions of grief while her mind drowned in a storm of questions and dread, because every smile she forced, every hug she accepted, every word of condolence from friends and family only reminded her that she was now carrying a secret so heavy it felt like it was suffocating her, and though Kane stayed close, watching her carefully, his concern only made her stomach twist tighter, because she no longer saw him as the man she had once believed in, but as the stranger Damian had exposed with his dying breath. Nights were the worst, lying beside him in the dark, hearing his steady breathing while she stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding with the weight of the documents hidden beneath her dresser, the forbidden letter she had folded back into its envelope but could not stop rereading, because each word was a blade cutting into the foundation of everything she thought was real. Damian's final moments were not a dream, not a delirious hallucination of a dying man, his words had been corroborated by that letter, by the evidence Kane himself had been hiding, and Lily now lived in a split reality, torn between the facade she showed her husband and the truth that haunted her every second. On the third night after Damian's death, Lily couldn't take the silence anymore. She slipped out of bed, padding barefoot into the living room, clutching the letter in her hands like it was a poisonous artifact, and as she sat on the couch she whispered to herself, "Why me? Why did they do this to me?" Her tears fell, hot and uncontrollable, as she thought of the family member Damian had accused, the one whose handwriting filled the page, the one she had trusted without question all her life. It made no sense. Why would they manipulate her marriage, her very heart? Was it truly for protection, as the letter claimed? Protection from what? From who? Or had it all been a convenient excuse to control her life, to keep her tethered in ways she could never escape? Every answer only birthed more questions, and Lily realized with a chill that if she wanted clarity, she would have to face that family member directly, but the thought of it terrified her, because if Damian had been right, if this was bigger than just Kane, bigger than her family, then confronting them might not just shatter her world, it might put her in danger she couldn't even comprehend. The next morning, she watched Kane move around the kitchen, his movements casual, his smile warm, and the sight made her chest ache because it all seemed so normal, so domestic, yet nothing about it felt real anymore, and she couldn't help but wonder, had he always been this good at pretending? Had every word of love, every apology, every promise been rehearsed lines in a play designed to keep her right where he wanted her? Kane looked at her and said softly, "You've been so quiet, love. I know you're hurting over Damian, but I can't help but feel like something else is wrong. Talk to me." The words sounded sincere, but Lily's mind screamed with suspicion, and she forced herself to shake her head, mumbling, "I'm just tired," because how could she confide in him when everything she knew about him was now a lie? Kane kissed her forehead, murmuring reassurance, but as he turned away, Lily caught the flicker of unease in his eyes again, the same unease she had seen in the hospital when she lied about Damian's last words, and she realized with bone-deep certainty that Kane knew she was hiding something, and that realization terrified her more than anything. That evening, Lily locked herself in the bathroom, pulling out her phone and scrolling through her contacts until her finger hovered over the name of the family member Damian had exposed. Her pulse raced as she stared at it, torn between calling them immediately and waiting until she had more answers, more leverage. Finally, with trembling hands, she typed a text instead, "We need to talk. Alone." She hit send before she could lose her nerve, her stomach twisting as she watched the delivered notification appear, and within minutes a reply came back, "Of course. Tomorrow. My place. Noon." The casualness of the response only unsettled her further, because if they were guilty of orchestrating Kane's deception, they weren't even afraid of facing her, they were confident, maybe too confident, and Lily realized that tomorrow could very well break her in ways she wasn't ready for. Sleep was impossible that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damian gasping for air, whispering his confession with such desperation, and she heard his warning again and again, "You were never supposed to be with Kane." By dawn, Lily was a wreck, but determination had taken root beneath her fear, and as she got ready to leave, she glanced at Kane sleeping peacefully and whispered under her breath, "If you've been lying to me all this time, I will find out." The drive to her family member's home felt endless, her hands gripping the wheel until her knuckles turned white, and when she finally arrived, she sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the door, summoning the courage to walk into what could be the most painful conversation of her life. When she finally knocked, the door opened quickly, and the familiar face smiled at her warmly, welcoming her inside as though nothing were wrong, as though they weren't the very person Damian had accused of orchestrating her entire life. Lily's throat tightened as she stepped inside, her eyes darting around the room, searching for signs of guilt, for cracks in the mask, but everything looked so ordinary, so calm. "You look pale," they said gently, ushering her to the couch. "I was worried about you after Damian's passing. Sit. Tell me what's on your mind." The kindness in their tone made Lily's stomach churn, because it was the same kindness she had trusted for years, the same kindness that now felt like poison coating a knife. She clutched her hands together to stop them from shaking and whispered, "Damian told me something before he died. Something about Kane. About you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her family member's face remained still, unreadable, but their eyes flickered just slightly, so quick anyone else might have missed it, but Lily saw it, and her blood ran cold. "Damian was always dramatic," they said at last, their voice calm, measured, almost too controlled. "He had a way of stirring chaos, even with his last breath. Whatever he told you, Lily, I need you to take it with caution." But Lily shook her head violently, tears burning her eyes. "No," she snapped, her voice cracking. "He was clear. He said Kane isn't who I think he is. He said you brought him into my life." Her words hung heavy in the air, and this time there was no denial, no feigned confusion, only a slow sigh, a lowering of the eyes, and a whisper that broke her heart, "I never wanted you to find out this way." The admission shattered something inside Lily. She staggered to her feet, her voice trembling as she cried, "Why? Why would you do this to me? To us? Was my entire life just some plan you made for me?" Her family member rose slowly, their expression one of sorrow but not regret, and they reached for her hand, though Lily pulled back as if burned. "You don't understand," they said softly. "It wasn't about control. It was about survival. There are things you don't know, threats you can't imagine. We had to protect you. Kane was the only way." But their words only fueled her rage, her grief twisting into fury as she shouted, "Protect me from what? By lying to me? By stealing my choices? You let me build a life on lies." Her sobs filled the room, and though her family member tried to calm her, to explain, Lily turned and fled, her body shaking as she ran to her car, slamming the door shut as if escaping a nightmare. Driving away, her vision blurred by tears, Lily realized that Damian had been right in every way, and though she now had confirmation of the betrayal, she had no answers, only more questions, more fear, more rage. The only certainty was this: she couldn't go on pretending anymore. The truth was out, and it would destroy everything if she didn't confront it head-on. As she sped down the road, gripping the wheel with trembling hands, Lily whispered to herself, "Kane, I know who you really are, and I will find out everything."